Hi, and welcome to Art with Mrs. Torres. Today's picture is going to be an underwater sea life painting. We are going to be using watercolors and watercolor paper. You're going to need a Sharpie marker and a large paintbrush. This is for painting our background. You're also going to want to get a bowl or a cup of water. And lastly, you might want to look for a sponge. I'm going to be using the sponge to blot the water onto the paper. It's a little faster. Now, if you don't have a sponge, just go ahead and use your large paintbrush. That'll work just as well. So gather those items up and meet me back here, and let's begin. Well, let's get ready to do our underwater sea life picture. I'm so excited to teach you this lesson because I just think it's turning out so pretty. This is an actual photograph of some sharks swimming in the ocean. This would be if you were underneath the water looking up at the sharks. This is the sunlight filtered through the ocean water, and you are underneath. So you can't see the detail of the sharks. You can only see the silhouette of their body. This is where I got my inspiration to do this project. So that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be adding a little bit of a coral reef around the edges with some different plants. I'll walk you through the steps on how to do that as well. So for today, you need one piece of watercolor paper. You're going to need a bowl of water and a sponge or a large paintbrush for filling the paper with water. I'm going to be using a sponge. You're also going to need a pointed paintbrush for doing the detail work. If you have different size pointed paintbrushes, that would be great. But if you don't, just one pointed paintbrush. You could even use the paintbrush that came in your watercolor set. This would work just fine. You're going to need a Sharpie marker. We're going to use the Sharpie marker for drawing the shark, and then we'll fill it in with our paint later. And you're going to need a napkin for wiping your brush off. Other than that, make sure that you have some type of paper underneath because we will be getting some mess onto the table as we're painting and filling our background. And go ahead, gather those items up, meet me back here, and let's get ready to do our beautiful underwater sea life picture. Okay, let's get ready. I've got my watercolor paper. We're going to be using a large brush or a sponge, a bowl of water. You're going to need a napkin and your watercolors for right now. That's all we need. You need a large brush for painting the color. We're also going to be using the sponge just for wetting our paper if you have one. If you don't, just use the large brush for that. So the first thing we want to do is wet our sponge into the bowl of water. So I'm just going to set my sponge down in here. Now, I just bought these sponges at the dollar store. They're supposed to be makeup sponges, but they work really good for painting. But you can just use a kitchen sponge if you have that. So I'm just going to get it nice and wet. It doesn't really hold a lot of water. I'm going to wring it out a little bit, and then I'm just going to wet my paper. So you don't want to rub the paper very hard when you're doing this because you don't want to start to make the paper disintegrate. But the sponge works so much faster than using a paintbrush to just get the paper good and wet. And then what happens as you start to wet your paper, whether you're using a paintbrush or the sponge, is you're going to notice that the paper starts to curl. So especially if I flip it over, you can see it's really curling up. So my hint is to then take a little bit of water and rub it over the back. So once you moisten the back of the paper, especially those four corners, guess what? It just calms that paper right back down. And then I'm going to flip it back over to the front again. Give it one more coat of water, making sure there are no dry sections and no giant puddles. Okay, now time to wet our watercolors. The colors we're going to be using today are blue, purple, green, and a tiny bit of black. So I'm going to take my sponge out of the water, wring it out, put it over on the table. First thing I want to do is start to wet my colors. So I'm going to get my big paintbrush. I got this big red one. This one works nice. And I'm going to add some water to my blue. And then the ocean is not a solid blue. It's got a little green in it. So I'm going to drop a little green water into the green. I'm going to add a little water into the purple and a tiny bit into the black. We don't want to use a whole lot of black. The main color we'll be using is blue. And then I'm going to now begin by painting the center of my paper with blue. So I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to dip it into that blue paint water, stir it up, get it nice and coated on my brush. And start right in the center. And I'm going to make a big circle. I'm going to get a little bit more blue paint. And I'm going to make that circle get a little bigger. If your paint is not spreading, if you lay some color down and it doesn't do this, it means you need more water on your paper. So all you got to do is just go back in with your brush or your sponge and just moisten that paper a little bit more. So once you've put a little bit of blue in the center, you're going to spread that blue all the way around. And I'm just moving my brush in a circle. And then once my paper is covered with blue, then we're going to move on and start adding a few other colors to it. So I'm going to add a little bit more blue now to the bottom of my paper and the corners. I'm working kind of quickly because I don't want my paper to dry. Next, I'm going to start to add a little green. So now I'm going to rinse out my brush. I'm going to dip my brush into the green and brush a little bit of green into my color. Then I'm going to add another coat of blue right over the green. The next color we're going to add is blue again, but this time we're going to put that blue a little darker around the sides because our color is going to start getting darker. So if you'll notice, I'm going to do one side at a time. I'm adding a little bit more blue. And now I'm going to try a little purple right around the edge. We kind of want to give the illusion of it being lighter in the center and darker around the edge. We're going to even get it darker in just a minute. Okay, so we have some blue and green, and then we've got some purple. Now, if your color is too purple and you want it more blue, look, you can just add another coat of blue right over the purple, and it'll darken it. And now our final color, we're going to lay around the edge, is a tiny bit of black. Now, I don't want you to go crazy with this black. We're just going to lay a little bit in. So I'm going to take my brush, I'm going to wet it and dip just the corner of my brush into the black. You'll see it's pretty dark. Just using the corner of it. I'm going to paint it right here in the corners. And because my paper is wet, it's going to be easy to spread it. And I'm just going to keep it around the edge of the paper. It's kind of painting it onto the background. You can do the same at the bottom if you want to bring a little bit to the bottom. And don't worry, if you think it's getting too dark, we can lighten it up by just adding a little bit of water to it. Plus, I have another trick in just a minute. Okay, so once you have that color in there, and your color's all swirled around, clean your brush really well because we don't want to have any black on our brush. And if any of your paper has dried and your color is not blending like this, add a little bit more water. So like right in here in the middle, I can add a little bit more water and swirl my brush around. And then this is where we're going to go in with our napkin. So now I'm going to clean my brush, put it off to the side. I'm going to take either a napkin, paper towel, or toilet paper and tear a little bit off, roll it into a ball. And what we're going to do is lighten this area here. If you look at the photograph, you'll see it's very light where the sunlight's coming in, right? So we want to kind of give that same illusion. So I'm going to just take my tissue, roll it into a little ball, and I'm very softly going to tap it right in the center like this in a circle. And then if you would like to, you can actually go in and just in a few random spots do the same thing so that it doesn't look so perfect. You really don't want your ocean to look like a perfect circle. You kind of want it to look like the real ocean. And there would be bubbles of air and movement in the water. So by tapping, it kind of breaks it up so it doesn't look quite so hard and stiff. And don't worry about that dark edges on the side because we're going to be making it much darker later when we paint our coral reef. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my painting out to a sunny location or into a sunny window. I'm going to let it dry, and then you and I are going to go back when our painting is dry, and then we're going to go in and do our detail with our black Sharpie marker and our black paint. So take your picture to a sunny window very carefully and let it dry, or take it outside if you live in an area where you can put it outside, and then meet me back here when your picture is dry. Welcome back. So I've got my paper, it's dry. I have a pointed paintbrush, and you can decide what size you have. If you have more than one, go ahead and gather those up. You can also just use the paintbrush that comes in your watercolor set. That will also work. You'll just be able to paint a little faster if you have something a little larger. You're going to need a Sharpie marker for drawing our shark. And for the plant life, that's where we're going to be using our pointed brush. We're going to be using it for all this detail work. Okay, for drawing the shark, I found these silhouettes online. I just was looking around for some silhouettes of a shark. I just thought it was kind of a cool shape, the way it curved. So let's begin by first drawing the silhouette of our shark. So the photograph that I showed you earlier shows two sharks here. One is going this direction, one is going this direction. Once you've drawn one, you're welcome to draw a second one if you would like to. All right. Let's begin. I've got my Sharpie marker. We really don't need a pencil. This shark is not hard to draw. I'm just going to follow what I see right here. So the first thing I noticed when I'm looking at that shape of the shark, it's kind of like the curve of a backward C. So I'm going to decide where I want the nose of my shark. I'm going to make a dot. And it's going to be curving around like this. So from that dot, I'm just going to curve it around. And then I'm going to now change the shape by making my shark a little larger. This is going to be kind of the inside, but now I'm going to change it up a little bit. So the first thing I'm going to do is I notice that the head is kind of pointed at the top here at the nose, and kind of rounds around on the side. So if I turn it this way, you can see what I'm doing. So it's pointed at the nose, kind of like the front of a football. And rounded at the side. It's going to taper back and get very skinny once it gets to the end. So all I'm going to do now is just begin to start to taper this back until it forms a point. And I'm going to match it on this side. Now, once I have that shape, then I'm going to work on the tail. So look at the tail. The tail basically is a V, but depending upon which way you have your paper, it might be an upside down V. So I'm just going to go like this, make a V or an upside down V. It's a little wider where it connects. So I'm going to make it a little wider, and it comes to a point. I'm going to round it a little bit on the side to make it a little bit more curved. And then I'm going to work on the pectoral fins, these fins right here. So I'm going to go over here, turning my paper now. I'm going to come about halfway back, and I'm going to make a curved line that goes out. And then I'm going to come to the other side and match it out. It's going to be wider at the base where it connects to the body. And it's going to curve around and make a point. I'm going to match it on this side, curves around and makes a point. And then I've got two small fins here, one on this side, one on this side, and then one more right here on the side. And once I've drawn everything, now I can go in and fill it in. So if you don't want to paint it, you could go in with your marker and fill the entire picture in with your marker. I think it's much faster to just go in and use your paintbrush. So I'm going to be using a pointer paintbrush with my black paint. I'm going to add a little water to my black paint. It's kind of dried out since I used it last. I'm going to add a little bit more water to it and stir it around. Wipe my brush on the side. So I'm going to start by filling in the nose and rotating my paper. And then what I love about a rounder brush or a pointed brush is that you can get a very fine line with it, or when you're pulling it towards you, you can get a wide line. So these brushes are really versatile. So all I'm going to do is fill the nose all the way down to the tail in. Remember to hold your brush straight up and down when you're getting down to the tail area. And if you are using the smaller brush that comes with your watercolor set like this, you can do the same thing. You can spread it by pulling it on the side like this. And if you want a skinny line, you're going to hold it straight up and down. So I want you to work on finishing your painting. I'm going to work on finishing mine, and then meet me back here when you've filled it all in. Okay, once you have filled in your whole shark, you can go back over it one more time if you want it to be very dark. So I give it a second coat, and that's going to cover up all of your paintbrush lines. So the second coat really helps to kind of fill it in and make it look a little bit more opaque, meaning not transparent, meaning you can't see through it. So once you've given it a nice second coat, then it's going to look really shiny and black. That looks fantastic, don't you think? Okay, now we're going to have some fun. So we're going to go in and we're going to draw this fun coral reef. To start out, I'm just going to dip my brush in water. I'm going to dip it back into my black paint, get a nice good coat on there. And all I want you to think about right now is making a wobbly line that goes all the way around the edge. Now you don't want to cover up all this really pretty color, and you can start it anywhere. So I'm going to start it up from the corner right here, and I'm just going to make kind of a wobbly line that goes in, out, all the way down to the bottom. Then I'm going to dip my brush back in the black paint, and at the bottom of my paper, I'm going to do the same thing, but it's going to be a little bit lower. Need a little bit more black on my brush. Then I'm going to go up to the top here, and I'm going to make kind of a rock that kind of juts out to the side. Maybe I'll make this one stick out a little farther. So once I've filled the sides with kind of this rocky surface, I'm going to fill this in with my black paint. So you're going to do the same thing we did with the shark. Now we're going to go in and just fill this space in. So taking lots of paint on your brush, using the side of your brush, you can just pull it down. Don't forget to always add a little bit more water as you're working, and tickle your brush onto the surface. So now what I'm going to do is go in and fill in all of the edges. So all of this space is black. I want you to do the same thing, and then meet me back here when you're done. Now earlier, I had mentioned that if you have a larger pointed paintbrush, this is a great time to use this brush. So watch how fast I can fill this space in when I'm using a larger brush. Still a pointed brush, but it holds a lot more paint. So watch how fast I can paint this side by using a larger paintbrush. So I've got a nice, generous amount of black paint in the brush. It's not dripping. How quick I can paint this side. So I'm going to come right up here. I have filled in that space much quicker with a larger brush because it can hold a lot more paint. When you're finished filling it all in, we're going to do a lot more detail. This is just kind of like the base coat of our coral reef. So I'm going to go back in now and give it a second coat on some of the areas that are a little bit lighter. Now it's time to go in with my medium pointer brush, this brush, or you could also use this brush. And now I'm going to start doing some different plant life. So this is where we're going to have some fun. Now, the first plants that we're going to do are very light. So we're going to barely use any color on our brush at all. So what I want you to do is take your brush, dip it in water, get a good amount of water on your brush. Let me put my water back so you can see my water. So I'm going to put a good amount of water on my brush. And then I'm just going to dip it a little bit into the black paint. We don't want it really dark. So you can see it's not super dark. You can see it on my napkin. So water first, a little bit of paint on my brush. We want this to be a little bit more watery. This plant life is going to look like it's kind of in the distance. And I want you just to choose a space at the bottom and hold your brush straight up and down. And I just want you to make some soft, wavy lines. Make sure that your paint is kind of watery. You want to be able to see through it. So I'm really adding water to my brush, and I'm just kind of making some wobbly lines. Now these are going to dry, and they're going to look like they're in the distance. So now what we're going to do is come down to the bottom, and we're going to start to create some different plants. So choose one of these little bumps, and that's going to be where you're going to form your first plant that's a little darker. And I want you to make your stalk of your plant a little bit thicker this time. Now draw a little slower. You can make it wavy, you can make it straight. Now, because these are dark, you see that doesn't it look like this is in front of those ones that are light in the background? Now we're going to change up that plant a little bit. I'm going to rinse out my brush. And I'm going to tap it on my napkin so it's not really wet. I'm just going to grab a little bit of this paint water. I don't want it to drip too much. So I'm going to tap it on my napkin. And I'm going to lay my brush down very gently on an angle along the stalk of that plant. So I'm just tapping my brush like this. Then I'm going to get a little bit more paint on it, tap it on my napkin, and then I'm going to lay it the opposite direction. I'm going to do the same thing on each stalk. Now, once you've done this, I'd like you to find another area in your composition where you could match this. So create this plant somewhere else, maybe on this side, maybe from one of these little rocks that are jutting out from the side. So remember, we want to start with a darker color. So it's darker than my first one, which it is. And I'm going to hold my brush straight up and down, and you're going to draw 1 or 2 or 3 stalks coming out. You want to make sure that that stalk is darker than the background ones, which it is. You're going to get a little bit more paint water. You don't have to stick it back in the water, just back here. Tap it on your napkin so it doesn't make a big drip. You're going to set your brush down very gently. Okay, once you have finished that plant, now we're going to try making a different kind of plant. So for this one, we're going to take our brush, and it goes up and over, up and over, up and over. Now you notice I'm not grabbing any more paint. I'm letting my brush start to dry out. And as my brush dries out, my bristles start to separate. And that's making it kind of look like a little bit more feathered. Now, if you would like to, you can make another one of those somewhere else. Remember, we just need a little bit of paint, blot it. You don't want too much. Find another area where you can create one of those plants somewhere else. So I make a center dot. And turn my paper right here. And I'm going to go up and over, right through the middle. And that plant looks softer and softer We're gonna get a little bit of paint on our brush, tap our brush so it's not wet. We're gonna make the main stalk somewhere. So I'm just gonna find a place where I wanna make one, maybe right here. And I'm gonna make a main stalk that's a little bit skinnier. And this time, I'm going to get a little bit more paint on my brush. I'm going to set my brush down a little harder. Now, as I press down a little harder, I'm going to flip my brush over, and the paint that's on the opposite side of the bristles is going to squish over to the opposite side. So that's why I flip my brush over. I'm going to get a little bit more paint. Always tap it on my napkin. So you can see this one looks larger. And the leaves are longer on that plant. And then I'm going to just go in now with the tip of my brush and draw just a few darker strands of seaweed. It's dry. I'm going to rinse out my brush. And I'm going to take a napkin now, tear a little piece off. And just how we blotted the center, now we're going to do something a little different. We're going to take our napkin. You don't need very much, just a little bit. We're going to get a little bit of that paint onto our napkin. I'm going to blot it first onto my leftover napkin. And now you can go in and you can make some soft coral in some of the spaces. I'm just tapping it, and you can see that it makes a really soft texture just by using the napkin. I just think this is such a fun project. Did you have fun doing this one today? I would love to see your work. Please send me a picture of your finished painting to rtorres@lcusd.net. Let me see your work. Let me see what you've been doing. Hope you had fun. See you for our next art lesson. Have a great day.